What's going on, guys, and welcome to another Doctor Who classic review. Today I'm going to be reviewing the first Doctor William Hartnell story, The Gunfighters. This is a story from season 3, and it's one that I've been interested in looking at, interested in watching. It's known for being, it's kind of a musical to start with. When people said it was a musical, I was really kind of interested, but also a bit worried. But now that I've watched it, it's not as much of a musical as I thought. There are musical elements to it, but it's not quite as over the top as I think I expected it to be. But there are definitely musical elements to it, a lot more so compared to normal Doctor Who episodes. It is, of course, also a Western story, so it's, set in the Wild Wild West. There's no aliens in this story. It's a pure historical. It even has historical characters in it, like these are real characters that were in history at this time. So, yeah, it's definitely an interesting story in that perspective. But, yeah, let's get started. This is The Gunfighters by Donald Cotton. Tombstone, Arizona, 1881. The air is filled with sounds of shooting, cussing, and toe-tapping tunes knocked out on the battered piano at the Last Chance Saloon. And then there is something less familiar, the wheezing, groaning sound of a police box materializing. The Doctor and his companions aren't the only newcomers in town. The Clanton brothers have ridden in to settle a grudge with Doc Holliday, the notorious gambler, drinker, and dentist. In the Wild West, tempers are short, guns are swift, and a moment's hesitation on the draw can mean death. So, not really a massively kind of, plot-driven synopsis on the back of the DVD there. Doesn't really give you a whole lot away, but to be honest, this story as a whole, there's not a whole lot to it. There's the whole story of Doc Holliday, and you've got the Clantons, and there's kind of a feud between them, and then Johnny Ringo comes in between it. You've got Kate, who's kind of the mistress of Doc Holliday. The Doctor, Stephen, and Dodo get caught up in all this as well. It's basically just a battle between the two kind of groups, I guess, with different people coming in and out all the time. It's not the most crazy and kind of enthralling plot, but yeah, let's just get started with the cast. Alright, so William Hartnell as the first Doctor. Yeah, William Hartnell's pretty good in this one. He's very, very grumpy at the start of this story. A little bit confused in my... Well, not confused, but I felt like by this point he'd kind of gotten... He'd become more of a, a nicer Doctor compared to like when he, the first season. I feel like towards the end of his run with, Ian, Barbara, and Susan, he kind of just became a lot nicer, but at the start of this story he is very mean to Stephen and Dodo. Yeah, maybe it's because he's got a toothache, he's kind of a bit annoyed about that, but I don't know, he comes off a bit mean, but it's the Doctor, it's the first Doctor. I can kind of get over it, it's fine, whatever. He actually does come around for the rest of the story and is quite good fun. But yeah, I don't think it's anything particularly outstanding for William Hartnell and the first Doctor in this one, but yeah, nothing bad, that's for sure. Peter Purves as Stephen Taylor is pretty good in this one. Puts on an American accent, which is a little bit cringy, but it's not too bad from him, to be honest. And yeah, he does a decent amount in this story, I guess. The companions aren't a massive focus on this story, I don't feel. So yeah, he's fine. And then Jackie Lane as Dodo Chaplet. This is only the second time I've seen Dodo, I'm pretty sure. Second or third. Yeah, I can't. It might be third time, actually. I can't remember. But yeah, Dodo. What do I have to say? She's fine here, I guess. She doesn't really do anything. She kind of just hangs around with Doc Holliday for most of the story, to be honest, or towards the end of the story anyway. So yeah, she's fine. She's nothing special here. I think that's generally what most people seem to think of her character in general. So yeah. Alright, so let's get on to the good and the bad, starting with the good. The characters are based on real people from Wild West history. This is probably my favourite part of the whole story. They didn't just go with random characters here, they went with characters from history. Now, Doctor Who did this quite a lot, especially in the William Hartnell era. There was a lot of historical stories in this era that were based on real people and real events. I don't know if this is necessarily based on real events per se, because I don't really know this whole Wild West, thing, but just kind of from my little bit of knowledge, I knew the name of Johnny Ringo, I knew the name of Doc Holliday. I mean, they mentioned like Billy the Kid, heard about him as well. A lot of these other characters I hadn't really heard of before, but looking through on the Wikipedia page at least, they're pretty much all actually real life people, so I think that's just really interesting. Of course, Doctor Who was going at some points for a more educational type of a show back then, so it's really cool to see that aspect of the show here. It's a little bit different to what we're used to nowadays, and to what would become the norm in most of the classic series as well after the William Hartnell era, but yeah, for what it is, it's cool, and I do like this whole real life characters thing. Johnny Ringo kills Charlie, so we get Johnny Ringo in, and I think he's a pretty cool character. He's kind of the bad kind of, bit of a cool kid sort of vibe to him, and he goes and kills Charlie, who's the barman at the Last Chance Saloon, because he's kind of, Charlie knew who he was, and he doesn't want Charlie to spread on information about him, so he's like, you know what, just gonna kill you. And that's a pretty sad moment. Yeah, not really a whole lot more to say about it, to be honest. The Doctor becomes the sheriff for a brief amount of time. I think this was because the Doctor wanted to try and stop the shootout between the Clantons and the lawmen. Like, you got like Wyatt Earp, Warren, all those sort of people. Doc Holliday's a part of that team as well, and then all the Clantons. He wanted to kind of stop that shootout, or try and figure out what's going on here, and he becomes the sheriff briefly, wears the badge. So that was a nice little moment for the Doctor there. And then finally for my good, because I don't have a whole lot to say in general about this episode, the shootout between the Clantons and the lawmen was pretty good. It was a nice little shootout. Yes, some of the aiming was a bit bad, which we'll get to in a minute, but by some of the characters, but it was cool to have the shootout. Yeah, it's just a nice little action scene, I suppose, for a story that generally, for a Western story, didn't seem massively action orientated, apart from a few little scenes. It was nice to have this big action scene at the end, and yeah, I think generally, apart from the fact that some of the shooting was a bit like, they're shooting like stormtroopers and stuff like that, and the fact that the winning team, I don't even think lost a single person in this battle, and everyone on the other team died. Yeah, other than that, it was an exciting end to the story. Alright, on to the bad. My list is about as big as it is as the good, which neither of them are particularly big, to be fair. Starting off with, the Western actors start getting annoying. So, a lot of the actors in this are British, because Doctor Who, British show, especially back then, in the 60s, didn't really have the budget or anything, or the show didn't have the widespread to hire American actors and stuff. Now, of course, Wild Western times, they've got very, very heavy southern accents. They always do in these Wild West shows. I think it's just a bit, there's a lot of talking in this episode, a lot of talking, and honestly, you can tell, although some of the accents are not exactly bad, you can tell when it's a put on accent, and most of the characters in this are most of the actors are putting on an accent, and I think it just gets a bit draining after a while. Generally, I find very strong Southern American accents a little bit irritating anyway. Sorry, but I just do. And when it's like somebody putting on that accent, it's even worse, and it just kind of drains in my ear. I mean, I guess it's a minor thing, but when there's so much talking in the episode, it does kind of grate on you a bit. The Last Chance Saloon song gets rather repetitive. It's really the only musical element to this. I mean, everybody says this is a musical episode, but it only has the one song, which is the Last Chance Saloon song. We hear like different variations of it and different whenever we hear it, it's commenting on what's just happened, what's happening on screen. So I like that interpretation of it, but it's the same basic tune. It basically ends in the same sort of way of the Last Chance Saloon, and it gets a little bit annoying. I did quite like the moment, the scene where Stephen and Dodo were playing and singing the song. I thought that was quite cool. That was interesting seeing that there, because that when they were making a persona for themselves, a character for themselves here, they said that Stephen was a singer and Dodo was a pianist. So it was cool to see that come into play. Other than that, the rest of the Last Chance Saloon song, yeah, it worked nice here and there. It was cool to see, you know, how they were, when somebody died, the song would kind of play on that and be talking about that, but ultimately I think it did get a little bit annoying. Finally, the Clantons didn't hit a single shot in the shootout. I mentioned this before, but yeah, although the shootout was quite exciting just because it was a nice little end and, you know, having a bit of action at the end, the Clantons ultimately got destroyed. I mean, especially when you consider that they started, there was 3 of them in the line. The two Earps, that sounds so stupid. The 2 Earp people, you know, Wyatt and Warren, started I think it was Wyatt and Warren anyway, 2 of them anyway, started walking up to the Clantons, and the Clantons started shooting at them, and they were still walking up to them for a good 5 or so seconds, somehow didn't get shot once, and then just ran out of the way. And I was just like, how did they miss so many shots when they were just standing right in front of them, walking at such a slow pace? So yeah, a little bit disappointing there. Anyway, I've actually ranted on longer than I thought, considering of how little points I have on this episode. So a rating out of 10 for the Gunfighters, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. I think it's okay. It's a bit below average in my opinion. The musical element wasn't actually as big of a play in this as I thought it was going to be. So that in itself kind of made me like it a little bit more, because I was worried that it was just going to be constant music. But that wasn't really the case. There was little slips here and there, and there was a couple of bigger pieces of music where Steve and Dodo were doing it, and when Kate was doing it as well for quite a while. Other than that though, it was just little 10-15 second slips here and there. So that wasn't too bad. But yeah, the story itself doesn't have a whole lot to it. There's a lot of talking, there's a lot of dialogue. I think it's ultimately a pretty good educational sort of thing with all the real life characters, but other than that, when it comes to Doctor Who, it doesn't feel very Doctor Who-y, and yeah, it can get a little bit boring in my opinion. It's only 4 parts long, but it can drag a little bit in my opinion. So a 6 out of 10 for the Gunfighters. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, please go ahead, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.